we all just got together, we'd have 50 million of top line revenue. Then my name is Gene Rich, and about 6 years ago, I started Traceless. If you run a business and you can grow it to a certain level of size and margin, you as a business owner can have an exit that might provide generational wealth. Did you ever watch In Living Color? Somebody who has all the jobs.
I was a maintenance man, a carpenter, a cab driver, a cook, a hospital orderly, a security guard.
That's really an apt skit for most of our community. To many MSP owners, we're not trained salespeople. Getting warm referrals and telling this customer what you do for their friends doesn't signify that you're actually a salesperson or a good salesperson. We're going to see a lot more influence and activity with. We have all this capital that we need to deploy. So what are we going to do? What's interesting is now you have people who are coming to the table who are saying, okay, we have all of that, but I think that's like an easier thing when you're smaller. But I think as people get bigger, I'm sure that they might buy.
Welcome back to this episode of MSP Insider, the show where we ruffle the feathers a little bit, have the conversations that hopefully are the things that you want and need to hear as an MSP, maybe even not expected to hear. And in some cases that won't get spoken out loud anywhere else. This time, stepping into the ring for it is Gene. Gene, why don't you tell us who you are, what you do, and why the hell you do it?
Yeah, Jeff, thanks for having me. It was good. We just spent 30 minutes talking together, so I think that this is going to be fun to continue our conversation. A little bit about myself. My name is Gene Rich, and I started an MSP called Point 20 years ago. So February, it'll be 20 years. And about 6 years ago, I started Traceless, which is a software company that helps people protect identity and conversation, as well as sensitive information. And that was really, spawned out of my MSP has a problem and I can't find a solution for it. And I feel this is a problem with enough weight that I need to dedicate my life to solving it for myself and other people. Outside of that, I live in New York. I've got 3 little kids and a wife, and I guess enjoy being outdoors and in gardening. It's probably like the top hobby.
Right. Yeah, that's a great polar opposite too, from building a software company, running a chaos, which is what managed services traditionally is, and then the zen in the garden. So
yeah, it was really interesting. I had to explain to my soon-to-be 6-year-old what a hobby was.
yeah.
He was like, "What's a hobby?" Because we were looking at like a woodworking magazine.
Oh, sure.
And I was like, well, so Papa has to go to work and he's got a job, but people who are like me might want to do other things with their time that they really like doing, but it's not something that you do full time for work. It's called a hobby, and it's like you think like, how dumb is this?
Yeah.
I'm like sitting here explaining to a kid that I don't do what I really want to do to make money. It's just like the whole conundrum of like, we all have to work, and most of us do, and explaining to a child who just does what they want to do mostly. It's a beautiful thing for them.
Yeah, absolutely. What a great audience though to do your to practice the art of communication around like what you do for the day job side too, right? I think that's it's an interesting way of challenging one's self to try to explain what Traceless does, but to a 6-year-old. And from a messaging and a communication standpoint, I think that's where a lot of times the MSPs or like the technicians or the tactician part of us kind of get that wrong too, right? We come at it with this wealth of knowledge of all of these highly technical things, and yet, he's not going to know. A 6-year-old's not going to know what OAuth 1 versus 2 is and whether or not that matters for some particular thing. Instead, it's like, well, explain it to me like I'm 6. So, that's
absolutely.
Cool. We usually open the show with a question that's left behind from the previous guest. So it's kind of a nice way of just kicking off the conversation where neither of us are really prepared for it. And it just kind of opens up a nice dialogue that way. And then from there, we'll kind of dive into some of the topics that we discussed. This question actually comes from Jesse Miller. I'm going to read it so that I don't butcher it since it's not mine. And then we'll see what answer you have. So Jesse left behind. If you had one major responsibility that you're dealing with today that you could delegate, which responsibility would that be, and why do you want to get it off your plate?
Yeah, we just talked about this. This is an easy one. All right.
Yeah.
I was like, I was thinking, man, this is like you know, what's that like holiday gift exchange where
Yeah,
like the
like the
white
white
elephant
elephant
where you
thing.
can like you could take or leave your gift or you can take
Yeah.
somebody else's and just put the thing you got, just put it on their plate. And I was like, this is kind of like that, except I can't just like take this information and pass it on to your next guest.
Right.
So this one's easy, right? We just talked about this. In my MSP, as I work to focus more on traceless full time, I think when you start a company, typically you're a solo founder, and it's like a man with or a woman with a backpack, right?
Mm,
And it's just like that's your company, right? You got
yeah.
a laptop or whatever, and that's it. Maybe some cables and whatever. Um, but then you realize there was like a. Did you ever watch In Living Color?
Oh, yeah.
There, I forget which skit it was, but somebody's like, let me speak to the manager. Somebody who has all the
Uh-huh.
jobs.
Yep.
It's like the person complaining, like, well, I am
Yeah.
this person, and I'm also this person, right?
Right.
And I
Yeah.
feel like that's really an apt skit for most of our community, which are solo business owners, right,
Hmm.
who are responsible for everything. And as the MSP grew, you can have sometimes a luxury of giving hats to other people, right?
Hmm.
So, hey, it's been real. I'm very good at tickets. I like helping people. That's not the best use of my time,
Yeah.
right? Um, and in the late stages of where I'm at within my MSP, sales is the focus of our org,
Hmm.
and that's something that I'm not a clinical. I don't
Yeah.
know. I think myself included, to many MSP owners, we're not trained salespeople,
Yeah.
and I think it's been so fascinating going to all the breakouts at IT Nation, thinking like this is what I really need to learn about. And you have
Hmm.
all these companies, right? And
Yeah.
I think a lot of them fail to acknowledge that getting warm referrals and telling this customer what you do for their friends
Hmm.
is not actually, and then them closing
Yeah.
doesn't signify that you're actually a salesperson or a good salesperson,
Yeah.
right? It's a
Yeah.
real thing to be a good salesperson and have a career in understanding the hustle of
Hmm.
sales and how it works.
Yeah.
And so that's something that I'm really looking forward to ending off this quarter.
Yeah. The way that I experienced that over my course of time, in MSP specifically, it might be this way in other industries. I don't know. MSP is all I've done professionally, and so it's really the only thing I talk competently about. But
Mm,
um, what I discovered, because I came up on the tech side before I moved to the sales side, was that
mm,
what the industry talked about and like believed to be sales and selling wasn't actually really selling as much as what I labeled just order taking, right? Like, because it was either warm referral, or, a friend of a friend, or some other like somewhat direct connection where you just kind of had to show up and like navigate a conversation and eventually produce a quote regardless of what was on it. And then you'd close some business and you'd move on to the next one until that sort of cycle happened again. And so I look at that more like order taking or professional order taking, where you're really just like building a quote in your head and those are the questions you're asking, versus professional sales and selling, which is, everything from building rapport, right? Like an actual relationship with someone, all the way through discovering the need, finding the pain, uncovering the actual ideal outcome that they want, helping them understand that you're the thing that's going to get them there, and then instilling enough confidence and belief in them about you and your process that they actually like take action, right? Because
yeah,
the biggest thing we sell against is inaction in MSP, it seems like. So um, I'm excited for you to get that off your plate too, especially if it's not the thing that lights you up. Um,
yeah,
it seems like there's kind of that fear of failure that I think we all have, but I've seen it more prevalent in the MSP space too, where it's like the not knowing or the not doing is the thing that makes you cling onto it longer than you should. I don't know if that's
yeah.
been your experience too, but um, it's not so much fear of failure as it is like competence and capacity, I think, challenge each other a little bit sometimes in our space.
Yeah, and I think like there's definitely some people who come into the MSP world kind of saying like, okay, I'm gonna start a managed service provider. I've read a bunch of books about it,
Yeah.
and I don't have any customers, and I'm only accepting, this customer. I
Mm-hmm.
think a lot of us start from a way that's like very reactive based.
Yeah.
Someone has a problem, you could fix the problem and you have a rate, right? And
Mm-hmm.
I think that a lot of the selling that we find is also reactive. So it's like saying, oh, you're an MSP and you never get into patching or providing proactive services on the help side, right? And the
Mm-hmm.
engineering side. And I think that
Yeah.
that's the real gap for me is like moving from a reactive sales motion, whether it's account management or outbound sales,
Mm-hmm.
to a proactive one, right?
Yeah.
It's a similar journey, but it's one I'm quite excited to do.
Yeah. That's awesome. Let's
Yeah.
uh let's talk about our industry a little bit through a couple of different lenses. I mean, you've been in it 20 years in February. I was in it as an MSP for 18, and now a little over 6 or 7 months as a vendor for the space too. And you actually
Hmm.
have seen both sides of that as well with the traceless side, so MSP and vendor. One of the things that's not so new anymore, although it continues to ramp up, is the presence and prevalence of private equity in our space.
Yeah.
How do you feel, or what's your take on like how private equity has changed, maybe what innovation actually looks like for MSPs?
Yeah. I mean, I think I'd like to just zoom out a little bit, right? Because I think it's a really interesting conundrum that our country is dealing with. So I think that like we're really good at capitalism here.
Mm,
Like no one's better, right? Number
yeah.
one in capitalism. And for entrepreneurs like you and me,
Mm-hmm.
and all the other business owners in our space, there's over 100,000 globally. That provides immense opportunity, right? So if
Mm-hmm.
you run a business and you can grow it to a certain level of size and margin, you as a business owner can have an exit that might provide enough money for retirement. And if you do it to a certain level, it will provide enough money potentially for generational
Mm,
wealth, right?
yeah.
Now, that opportunity may not exist in our space without private equity, right?
Mm-hmm.
So I think that that's where it's good,
Yeah.
right?
Mm-hmm.
Um, in our country, I think it's difficult when you have two companies that own all the carrots
Mm,
in California,
yeah.
two companies that own all the wood that anyone can buy from Lowe's or Home Depot.
Mm,
And there's no, I think it's a little bit out of balance right now.
yeah.
And I think we're probably going to have that challenge in our space one day.
Yeah.
Um,
Yeah. There's the illustration I love, and I don't know that it came from this industry or not, but it's the person I heard it from, so it's who I always associate it to. And David Powell talks about how every industry over time goes through a pretty common cyclical motion, and that is the bundling and unbundling of things, right? And he'll normally talk about cable TV as an example, right? You go from
mhm.
3 main networks that you had to walk across the room to change, all the way to a cable bundle with 300 stations, and then went through the decoupling where it was like, well, you don't want 300 stations, you want like one Netflix subscription. But now you start to see, okay, now you can have all these other subscriptions, and then those are starting to get combined as well.
Yeah.
So, one, I guess I think it's fairly natural, maybe for our little slice of the world, the MSP space, to be kind of going through that same consolidation.
Hmm.
Um, and in some ways, it almost feels like it's teetering with or playing with the concept of some decoupling and decentralization too, right? And I don't know if that's because we evolved to a place where um, you couldn't be the aggregation of a bunch of things anymore because you were just like meh at all of them versus
Yeah.
being like phenomenal at one of them. And you're in a competitive space given that it probably gets classified underneath the security section, right? And
Hmm.
so I'm curious your take specifically, maybe one on the bundling and unbundling, and then two, if it's I wish I had a better word, but like the differentiation of a point solution rather than kind of getting the like, you look like this, you might act like this or smell like this, so you must be like this. Because I feel like a lot of that stuff gets watered down on the security side too.
Yeah, I think it's really interesting because my involvement as an MSP, when I moved to ConnectWise as like a provider,
Mm-hmm.
right? They had just kind of bought LabTech and Quozal and Screen Connect,
Yeah.
and they had Manage, right? And so they were like selling this vision as like a modern office suite. For those of you who were around then, that's what you bought, right?
Yeah.
And with a vision and commitment that they were going to actually integrate all these tools, and you'd have like kind of like a more unified single pane of glass to run your whole business on, and everything would just talk to each other, right?
Yeah.
And I think that that's continued, right, as private equity has gone on the vendor side, the
Mm-hmm.
SaaS applications, and continue to buy and fold in other platforms into each other, right? Into like probably two or three main holding companies now, brands that we have in our space. Um, what's interesting is now you have people who are coming to the table, like super ops, for example,
Mm-hmm.
who are saying, okay, we have all of that, but the pricing is more aggressive and we built it all from the ground up together. So it actually is actually one product.
Mm-hmm.
Um, And so it's interesting to see that there's like the bundling and continuing of that business model, and then a lot of upstarts who or startups who are just saying like, no, we do all these things. And I think we're starting to see that on the security side as well,
Mm-hmm.
where it's like, oh yeah, we're MDR, EDR, we do AV, we do DNS blocking, we have assessment services, we
Mm-hmm.
have there's a few platforms that are basically email security, retention, and archival of email, like, but they're just one company with all that stuff.
Yeah.
And I'm not sure that's going to be, I think that's like an easier thing when you're smaller,
Mm-hmm.
but I think as people get bigger or larger MSPs, I'm sure that they might buy one product from those people or want the platform for one or two products. But I find the larger companies are still just buying best in breed things to do the thing that they need fixed.
Yeah. Yeah. That was always, it was often my experience as well. It's like the the obstruction in having so many things bundled together is like it actually diluted the ability as the consumer to choose in a lot of ways, right? Like you wanted the best in breed point solution for whatever it was, but like it came with these other components, and we almost turn into our worst customers or prospects, right? Because we hate it when they try to strip apart the bundles that we have. But um, it's sort of that natural evolution to an extent too, where you either end up with stuff that sits on the shelf because you only really needed it for the one thing, or you go
Mhm.
and you end up getting the other point solutions to make up or overlap where the deficiencies are in just a decent one. So in in a consolidation market, or consolidated market maybe is a better way of saying it, is there anything that you've come up with that allows you to kind of spot real innovation versus just repackaging?
I think it's really on the need of what the business is selling and what their customers are asking for, right? And I
Mm-hmm.
think that drives a lot of MSPs tool adoption,
Mm-hmm.
their own risk profiles and how they want to run their business.
Yeah.
I do think that like we're going to see a lot more influence and activity with private equity in our space in the coming years. I think we're just in the early day
Mm-hmm.
kind of motion. I think that the what's driving that is the success of the businesses that we own,
Mm-hmm.
right? Um, and also uh, the amount of dry powder and private equity and people maybe who were like, oh, I'm really good at energy, but I have all like I know that we couldn't do another deal if we wanted to because there's not that many deals left, and
Mm-hmm.
we have all this capital that we need to deploy. So what are we going to do? We're going to take it. What industry are we going to take it to? And I think that that'll be something where we see a lot more.
Yeah.
influence. And I don't know about you, like, but I get a lot of inbound, BDR, private equity BDRs,
Hmm.
like, hey, I'd love to talk to you about what you're doing over there. And,
Yeah.
they look at LinkedIn, they drop a few, like, I did my research.
Hmm.
And that volume is increasing as we kind of go year over.
Yeah. And in some ways, I think the way in which private equity has entered the space um, allowed them to sort of like turn the heat up on the pot that they were boiling without it really being noticeable, right?
Yeah.
They started on the bookends, like the really large things and consolidating, which we talked about earlier. But then, really, what's been happening over the last 5, maybe 7 years is like the acquisitions and roll ups of the smaller ones, right? And only in the last 2 years have you really even started to see it publicly. And so there's an interesting, like, I don't know that it's a snowball effect, may not even be the right way to label it, but like the market itself as a result of the consolidation is just getting a little narrower and narrower, which makes it more apparent when those things are happening. Um,
Yeah.
and I don't want to talk about it
What?
like it's all
No,
negative. Go ahead.
no, no. I agree. One other thing I wanted to just say that, like, I've been doing a lot of thought about is, as an entrepreneur, I think that these are going to provide very good things for my family and for myself, right?
Hmm.
At the same time, I think historically, Americans, right, have had, I mean, if you look at, like, our old landlord, right?
Hmm.
Lovely guy. He came to Ireland or to America from Ireland with nothing. He worked
Yeah.
2 jobs his whole life. He was a security guard and a shop boy for a deli in Brooklyn, right?
Mm-hmm.
He saved all of his money and put it in the market. And from like the 70s through the 90s, he became like a multimillionaire by just buying index funds,
Mm.
right?
Yeah.
Incredible. It's the incredible opportunity we have
Hmm.
with private equity doing bigger deals and controlling a lot of the early stage stuff and having so much access to more capital. I think that we're going to see a lot of, like, over time, lack of opportunity for people who are younger than us
Mm.
having that opportunity to put money in a place where companies go to grow and get capital. Because I think a lot of, like, look at SpaceX, for example,
Yeah.
not public,
Hmm.
right?
Yeah.
But to do what they did
Hmm.
20 years ago probably would have had to go public, right? And
Yeah.
all of that growth would have been returned to the citizens who invest in index funds,
Mm.
right? And so I think that that's another, like, it's not looking good
Yeah.
in my mind for the future of um, Americans having good opportunity to participate in the fiscal success of the innovation and capitalism that we're so good at here.
Yeah. That's an interesting take. Also, being able to zoom out that far and look at it over longer periods of time is so important. It's such a good exercise to take that breath and zoom out and really
Yeah.
look across it. Um, what do you believe is one positive industry change that's emerged from all of the consolidation we've seen?
I don't know. Besides the entrepreneurs getting exits,
Yeah.
I don't. I mean, I don't think that the customers of all the vendors are happy. I think,
Mm.
if you go on Reddit, um, people, again, I think people who are talking on Reddit are, like, talking about things, right?
Yeah.
So it might, it might, it might be a disproportionate amount of the actual truth that people feel
Hmm.
about the industry and stuff.
Yeah.
But yeah, I think it's tough because I think my experience as a customer of products that get bought by private equity
Hmm.
is my customer experience doesn't improve.
Yeah.
You're like,
Yeah.
oh, now, like, I can't get a hold of someone. They're billing me more than they should. I mean, a prime example in New York State, I don't like this still blows my mind, but, like, our energy provider,
Hmm.
our utility, so it's a monopoly in Hudson Valley, is Central Hudson. And that got sold to a private equity firm,
Mm.
right?
Yeah.
And our um, like our cost for delivering the power
Mm-hmm.
is more than the actual energy itself. I mean, it's totally, and there's nothing I can do about it.
Yeah.
I don't have any other options.
Right.
I'm stuck with this company.
Yeah. You either do or don't
Like,
want power. You either do or don't
yeah,
want
yeah. I mean,
water,
I'm going to
right?
try to get solar so I
Yeah.
don't have to pay as much, but that's like requires an investment. And then we have a friend who has like a house in the like Placid area, and they have their own provider that's run by the town.
Mm-hmm.
And their house to heat it and everything is like $50 a month.
Yeah.
Like my house to heat it's like $500 a month.
Right.
I mean,
Yeah.
so I don't know. I wish I had better news, or maybe there's other perspective. Maybe when we post this, if you watch and listen, just put in the comments and hit me up and say,
Yeah.
Gene, you're missing it, man. Like, there's a rainbow over here you're not talking about. I
Right.
just can't think of it. I mean, how about you, Jeff? I mean, do you have any hot takes about that?
Um, I mean, it is harder, which is why I asked that contrasting question. Like, what is so positive? I think, um, I'm an optimistic realist, but I think I lean more towards the realist component of that too. And so I don't have an immediate like this is the best thing that's ever come out of it. I do think that it's forced the competition amongst the consolidated logos in a way, which on the surface seems like a probably positive thing, but in the end, because it's backed by PE, you actually end up getting an even worse experience as the customer because now they're getting so much pressure to produce in so many different ways that have nothing to do with the client experience, which
Yeah,
forces people to make decisions that they probably wouldn't have otherwise made, um, which I think
yeah,
cascades all the way through the org and then all the way down ultimately to the end user experience. So, um, to your point, though, I do think shining a light on an industry that became an industry because so many people built small businesses supporting other businesses. And so, like, there's a lot of um, entrepreneurial exits happening. And it might just be 2 decades before we see the fruits of those entrepreneurs and their kids or their families or whoever that impacted sort of like
yeah,
brings or bears the next fruit from that tree. um but yeah, I
yeah.
can't
I mean,
I can't
one
put my
thing
finger
that
on
I
one
thought
thing.
about. Yeah, I mean, there's one thing that like is kind of like related, but the rise of maybe some MSPs in a peer group who are like, oh, well, like if we all just got together,
Hmm.
we'd have 50 million of top line revenue, and then we do that.
Yeah.
So there's a playbook and there's a proven track record of the playbook, and then maybe business owners can say like, well, we could be that person, right? So I guess
Yeah.
that's like one positive. Besides that,
Yeah. Yeah. And we are actually seeing some of that, and maybe that's just it. Like we haven't kept our eyes on it long enough because we haven't seen the next thing emerge through it. But you have seen like the playbooks being adopted by people who are taking agency in their own hands, and like to your point, grab 5 people, put them together, and because of the returns and the multiples and everything else that's going on, you have a much more sizable impact when you get together. But that ingenuity is happening like in the middle layer, right? Just MSPs working with other
yeah,
MSPs to do it. One other area, and I don't, it's might tangentially related to PE influence, but let's talk for a bit about kind of the evolution of the trade shows, events, conventions, whatever you want to call them, right? It seems like there's no shortage of them. All right. I don't know. I was going through a list trying to plan out 2025 a couple weeks ago. There were like 52 of them or something like that to make a decision on. And I'm sure there's
yeah.
more, but of the
Yes, there
key
are.
ones, right? But from the outside looking in and now on the inside looking in about trying to make which choices you go to and like where do you make the investment? Where's the best return? Like, what's been your experience, even let's say over the last 5 years, with kind of how those events have evolved, both for the MSP and for the vendors that participate?
Yeah, I mean, I think that I never forget, like when I was a kid, my dad was very into aviation, right?
Mm-hmm.
every summer we go for a week to Oshkosh, Wisconsin, which holds the largest air show in the world, right?
Yeah.
And we went, I probably had like, a collection of pins, admission pins for like 15 years.
Mm-hmm.
I was like, as a kid, you collect those things, you get
Yeah.
stoked about them, right?
Mm-hmm.
And in that time, it kind of went from, oh, we were renting a campsite from the farmer who has got a cattle farm, right? That just happens to be adjacent to the airport,
Yeah.
right? To like now the airport owns all of that land, right?
Mm-hmm.
Okay. And then it used to be like, well, the person selling roasted corn was the guy who grew it or the
Mm.
family who grew it,
Yeah.
you know? And the person selling, they had a grill with some hamburgers and brats. They were just some small entrepreneur who somebody probably knew and said you should come and that'd be a nice thing, right? And
Right.
so, you have that kind of like time and place where the energy of passion of people
Mm.
uh, create uh, create a place to be um, that is really about that, you know.
Mm-hmm.
And then now it's like McDonald's and Burger King,
Mm.
and it's very commercialized, right? And
Yeah.
I think that the spirit of aviation is probably still very much around, but the experience of going to those things is very different. Um, I think that our industry has gone through that,
Mm-hmm.
where it was like a lot of early day, like, I think we're starting an industry. It's a thing. I'm passionate about it. And um, the events from an MSP owner, it's like you can only go to so many events. I mean, like, how
Yeah.
many people can take 5 weeks out of their normal work schedule to just not work,
Mm-hmm.
right? That's like pretty tough in my mind. Um, the vendor side, pretty sure the booths, like the price of the booths have kind of doubled in the last 5 years.
Mm-hmm.
And I think that creates a scenario that makes it a lot harder for an ROI
Yeah.
for the cost. And I don't see that changing. I don't see.
Yeah.
I think a lot of these bigger companies, like the events, were kind of like an adjunct business
Mm-hmm.
that was like fueling adoption and like maybe selling deeper of that product. And now it's like, no, this is actually a revenue unit that has its own performance metrics. And um, yeah, and I don't think that things will stop because there's so many people who want to be in the space because of the performance and the opportunities that
Yeah.
we just talked so diligently about.
Yeah.
So it's tough to really track down. On the flip side, though, I think that there's a lot of smaller communities doing very thoughtful work,
Mm-hmm.
right? And for me, that's where the action's at. That's like very, you can sit down and have real conversations with people and make relationships still.
Yeah.
Um,
Yeah, I agree. The real deals and the real relationships seem like they always actually occur outside of the event itself, but at the event, right? It might be
yeah.
dinner or bar or something like that, but it's it's a great place to still get the connection, but
Hmm.
it's almost only about that now. It seems, it just to a certain extent. One of the things you said though, and I really want to highlight it because this is something I often said when I was still in MSP, and I continue to say it as loud as I can anywhere I get the chance to, and that is, I believe that where most MSPs get it wrong is that they look at themselves as tech companies or tech businesses rather than service businesses. And you were talking a lot about the experience, right? The experience for kind of everyone involved, which I agree, and to me that parallels service.
Hmm.
Two books that really always stand out in my head and like became a component of my DNA after I read them. The very first one, which was years ago, although I've reread it several times in the last 6 months because it's quick and easy, is Raving Fans,
Hmm.
which is all about, really service through their definition. But I recently picked up Unreasonable Hospitality, which kind of is like a double down on the concept. But there was a question in there. I'm gonna ask you the question because I just read it this morning when I was reading through it, and that was, in your eyes, what's the difference between service and hospitality?
That's an easy one for me. Um, so far, easy questions. Thanks.
Yeah, you bet.
Uh, so in RMSP, the book that we have people read is a book called Setting the Table.
Hmm.
It's written by Danny Myers, who's like a serial restaurateur from New York. He founded Shake Shack, and it's whatever.
Yeah.
He has a legacy,
Right.
right?
Yep.
And so I think that the um, it really comes down to the way that you make people feel.
Gene, it's coming to that time in the show where I give you the opportunity to ruin someone else's day by leaving a question behind for the next guest.
Okay.
What question would you like to leave behind for the next guest?
Yeah, I mean, I hope it's not too hard, but I think it's well, to our conversation about events, I feel like there's a lot of media, right,
Mm,
in this space now. And I think it's hard for MSP owners to really consume all of that media as much as I want everyone to listen to this conversation. I know it's
yeah.
not happening, right? So my question is really geared towards all of the people who might want or listen to your podcast who are MSP owners, right?
Mm-hmm.
To the next guest, right? So question is, what generally has been your experience in an area of improvement that has created the most incremental increase in margin to the business of an MSP owner?
Mm. Yeah, that sacred financial metric. I love that one.
Yeah,
Yeah. Awesome. Gene, I appreciate you coming on the show. Appreciate the
yeah,
conversation.
good to see you.
Uh, if people want more from Gene or more about Traceless, where do they find you? Where do you want them to go? Be as shameful as you want.
Yeah, so I think traceless.com is our website. We've got a free tool for MSPs, so I'd encourage everybody to help the industry rise and use a tool like Traceless for free
Hmm.
to protect their company. I think if someone's interested in talking shop, just hit me up on LinkedIn. I think that there's one thing that's been consistent about the MSP space, and that's really the generosity of everyone who's here. And I think I'm the MSP owner I am today because of all of the people who helped me along the way.
Yeah.
And so if there's something that you like that we talk about, or you're stuck and you just need somebody to vent to or to brainstorm or ask advice for resource, just hit me up on LinkedIn. Yeah, that's the least I can do for all the generosity that people have provided for me so far.
Yeah. Awesome. Appreciate it. Thank you again for being here. And we will catch
Yeah.
everybody on the next episode.